right. DTM Hotel, Brittany, Sean, welcome in peace. My name is Sean. I want to apologize for the close of the video. I know there were some people watching, so I'm going to give you guys a chance to get in. And let me kind of correct it. I thought I would be able to go back in it, but I got an error, so bear with me just a moment. Let me get a few things squared away. And I'm going to get right back where we were at. So in the title is the actual research question. I didn't put a presentation together, anything like this. This is an impromptu discussion. And it says, are we, the conscious community, using social media correctly? Or are we abusing or misusing an opportunity? This is a valid question. It's a real question, because if we look at the history of things and how evolution takes place and so forth, we ended up at this point because of someone or a group of people in their efforts to try to right or wrong. And bear with me just a moment, and I'll get back where we left off at. Yep, pick up. So that's the research question. Are we using this thing we call social media correctly? This is going to be interesting. Ah, man. Earlier, I was on Garfield's show, and I had called in, and I think people couldn't really hear me. Said I was too low or whatever, but I didn't want to yell through the phone or anything like that. It made no sense for me to yell through the phone. But basically what I was stating at that particular time was that this community is actually toxic. It's dangerous. And if you aren't getting the correct tools to be able to pick up and acknowledge some of the toxicity and the dangerousness in the community, you could be swallowed up by it and a victim of misinformation, bad character, behavior, and a whole lot of other pseudo things that come along with that. But I don't want to kind of get into that right at this point. We may get into it. What I do want to elaborate on is, like I posed the research question, which is the title. And I didn't want to put a presentation together. I just wanted to go in. So I was speaking about my hypothesis, and if I was to write out a hypothesis, how would it go? Because we do want to have some kind of roadmap to this conversation. We just don't want to, like other networks and channels and things that people are usually tuned into, they just have a topic of discussion and then it goes out. So I don't want to. I have not been taught to wing it the way that other people do. There's structure to discussions and conversations and things of that nature. So I want to stick to that method, because there has always been a method, regardless of, how far back you want to go. Somebody had to learn something some particular way, and then they taught somebody else that same thing. They taught each other how to fish, how to survive in a natural world, what to stay away from, and things of that nature. There was a method. So time has taught us, nature has taught us and brought us to understanding of method. Oh man, so let's do this. Let's do this. So, are we, the conscious community, utilizing social media correctly? So, my hypothesis will go something like this. If consciousness means to know, to understand, to be informed of, and to gravitate to truth, then we, the conscious community, are struggling to be conscious of that which we're trying to acquire and obtain knowledge of. We seem to struggle with method, understanding, knowing, character, behavior, expectations, and our historical perspective. When we have evolved, and when I say when we have evolved, I'm speaking in reference to our access to information, we have easily fell into a trap of not knowing, but rather continuing to believe in that which we do not know of. And in the age of information, this reoccurrence has hindered the growth and the impact of our ability to advance our people forward. And it is in this that I believe that we are not using social media correctly, and we are missing the mark set by our ancestors to solve real issues with platforms to educate one another. Before we got kicked off, I was trying to gain some understanding. Basically, I wanted to go to the next step in my method that I'm winging here. I'm usually a little bit better than this, but I'm just winging it here for everyone. And I wanted to get a definition, just a working definition of what consciousness is. So the definition, as you can see on the screen, we use Merriam, it doesn't even matter. It's all going to kind of correlate the same way. It's going to say the state of being awake and aware of one's surrounding, right? I think Merriam says it's the quality of state of being aware, especially of something within oneself. Wiki says it's a state of quality awareness of being aware of external object or something within oneself. So it's kind of a redundant thing. Now to the conscious community, right? that definition can be manipulated. That definition can mean some of what the working definitions can state, but then it would mean more so along the lines of being awake. And our awake does not necessarily mean we just got out of the bed and we're walking and we brush our teeth, then we use the restroom, and then we wash our hands, or we hop in the shower, whatever your rotation is in the morning when you get up to prepare yourself for the day. That is a state of awake because we were just asleep. But in the conscious community, sleep is simply not knowing. Awake means to know. Some say, is your third eye open? Right? Pseudo, Hindu stuff. Third eye. Where did this concept come from? You know what I mean? Like, we're not questioning anything. Just whatever sound good, it's just we're going to roll with it. Yeah, my third eye is wide awake. You know what I mean? And I, not I, the letter I, because we're using English. It's I-Y-E. I. I am thankful. THANKHFUL. Of my ancestors for bringing me here. This is the vernacular in the conscious community. Right? All right. We can use whatever working definitions we want to use, but I'm just adding a little flavor to it because y'all know I'm kicking it, right? So hold on, let me supposed to share the link and I didn't, so let me give it out. And my apologies, I should have did this before I even came back. So we got a definition of what consciousness is. And we can go forward with, there's other levels of consciousness to other people. Apparently there's a metaphysical definition of consciousness, because if we go on social media, we will see people define consciousness totally different than what it says in the dictionary, since we are using English. And then they'll try to put a spin on it and say we can Africanize the definition. We always want to take something and paint it black. So now that we have a working definition of what consciousness is, we should all be aware of what social media is because we're using it. So the research question stands out, are we using this correctly? So before the age of social media, our ancestors used what they would call video recordings, cassettes, right? Old school, the digital era, right? We're in the social era, the digital era. If that's incorrect, correct me if I'm wrong. Anyone in the chat, correct me if I'm wrong. But I believe since we're in the social era, and we had to be in the digital era prior to this. This is, technical and all of that. So technical era, whatever, doesn't matter. But y'all know where I'm going. They had cassettes. Before DVD, they had cassettes and videotapes. And before cassettes and videotapes, they had 8-tracks. But I don't think you were putting out a lecture on an 8-track or a record player, if you follow what I'm saying. So we're going to say, in our ancestors' past, the tools that they used to educate people were either via cassette tape and video, but those were not the only tools. So what would be the major use for educating a mass without being in the same locale as these people. Written work, the art of writing, right? So they wrote journals, articles, blogs, they wrote books. But what were they writing about? Depending on the era, what they were writing about were things to bring us to the point of where we are today. They were combating racism, white supremacy, misinformation parroted by other African scholars or so-called African scholars or blacks who were pushing a different agenda. We can go before videotapes and cassette tapes where we're just dealing with books and journals and stuff in the what I want to call the groundbreaking era of what would be considered consciousness, the awakening or knowing of. And I will elaborate on that Sunday. I wrote an article about the American Negro Society in which I argued last week on Garfield's show, not really argued, but stated my opinion on my hypothesis on what consciousness meant at an era or time where the American Negro Society, Alexander Crummell, and the brothers that assisted him at that time in the era in the 1890s was pretty much a foundation, a solid foundation to build on consciousness, to be awake or aware of knowing who we are in history. And Unc had his view, his perspective was true, like the conscious community started with, how that whole thing goes out. And his points were valid, beginning with an atheist and so on and so forth, and advancing. And we didn't have too much contention. We were actually having fun. But what the point of that discussion was coming after a brutal few hours with a brother that was a Hebrew Israelite that was all over the place. And even though we were having fun, I said in the chat, I like, man, this conversation was much better than how we started, but it's also more educational because we were actually having fun, but there were a lot of teaching moments coming from both sides of the coin, even in a joking manner. And I don't think people really would grasp that, the beauty of that conversation. Maybe when they look back at it a year or two from now, they will actually clip out the first part of that video and deal with the latter half of that video, where we discussed the beginning or the making of the conscious community, or what we would deem consciousness and things of that nature, and then elaborate, because there were some historical names that were brought out in that conversation and some historical aspects of our ancestors. So I can't put us seriously into the 1860s or the 1840s or something like. Realistically, I can't take us there. But what I would suggest us to do in our method, since our research question is, are we, the conscious community, utilizing social media correctly? So let's take social media the technological aspects of social media and put it in the 1890s with an Alexander Crummell, right? How would he and the talented 10th use social media? Well, first, let me tell you what they were doing before that. They would attempt to have conferences in Washington, D.C. They would reach out via letters, mail, to other people that were doing work in the fields and gaining understanding. So there was more of an attempt to reach out to people through writing to garner their attention and to offer them an opportunity to be a part of something that they seemed was right for history and time and a people. Yes, they had the phones, but that would lead to phone calls. But there wasn't a time where they had Google Hangout where they can get 10 people on the line, or Zoom, which is a new technological feature where you can get 100 people on a conference call at one time and advertise it through Google Hangouts to the masses to educate the people. They just didn't have that. But what if they did have it? What if they had it? Because they formed teams, organizations in the 1800s, going into the 1900s, to combat racism and white supremacy by challenging the scientific field, the economic gap, the historical perspectives that were being written by Jews, different all types of Europeans, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Koreans, all of these people, the Western world ideology, they were combating all of the misinformation that was coming out of those circles. So what if they had the tools that we had today? How much more better off would we be? Well, back to our research question. Are we, the conscious community, utilizing social media correctly? I gave you my hypothesis, try to define it. I'm giving you some examples here in this particular bill. I don't want to try to be long-winded. We all really already know the answer to the question, but we still have to take the steps to properly come into our conclusion at the end. So we can't just start with the hypothesis and our hypothesis be our conclusion. So at some point throughout the past 100+ years, an evolution of intelligence emerged in what we call consciousness. I don't have anything written down. It's all off the top. But I hope I'm making sense to all of our viewers. How would they use social media if they had it then? So they had conferences in Washington, D.C., and because that's where Alexander Crummell was from, right? He was born over there. He's a Liberian guy, right? African, Liberian, American, Liberian. He has ties to Africa. He has ties to the West, what they call the West Indies, and then America. So he's three places. His vibe's three places. Great man, wisdom, full of wisdom, elderly, well-respected, renowned. There were other renowns at the time, but I'm just speaking in reference to what I can really build on right now. And what if they could have a conference on Google Hangout through Zoom, which would allow them, with all the members that they attracted at that time, to be panelists on that, and they had an 8-hour event. And all the other people in America would be able to just tune into that, and we would be able to solidify a position in the 1890s that would bogart us into the future, where we can just rewrite and destroy Western ideology scientific on a scientific plane and rebuild it from the ground up, knowing who we are. So let me just move a little further. The phone calls wouldn't be a need for the phone calls, because they would have been able to click a link to get on a Zoom, and then they would be able to wait their turn, and we would be able to learn from a Du Bois. We would be able to learn from a Carter G. Woodson. We would be able to learn from Cromwell. We would be able to learn from Cromwell. We would be able to learn from other members of the Talented Tenth and other organizational members that we did not get a chance to learn from, because we really didn't hear from them as much. So we'd be able to go back to that, jot our notes down while we're listening to the build, and research these things, buy the publications, and support these ideals, so that we can start funding our own projects to do what basically Browder did when he went to Kemet and he went on his own archaeological dig, because that's a big thing. Or we go to West Africa and we invest in an archaeological dig in Nigeria, and we uncovered pottery, and we uncovered smelting of iron that's dug deep down in the earth. And we were able to date and extract those things and bring them to the forefront for our ancestors, to show where civilizations were starting and how well we were doing all over the continent of Africa. Right? So let's come back to reality. They didn't have these tools. It doesn't even matter. But what the tools that they actually used, they tried to advance us. At that time, our greatest grandparents and grandparents in that time, they tried to advance them with as much information as possible to be able to get them to teach their children and their grandchildren these things about history from a perspective that they can correct what Kofi calls the fool system. So, thank you, Seneb. Thank you, Seneb. Seneb always on it. If I mishap, trust me. If I mishap anything right here, Seneb and True Storian will pick it up and be like, no, boom, this, boom, and we can move forward. Correction. Jewel droppers. This is important. What I'm saying, it's important. So what I'm saying is, they wrote and they published and they argued and they held conferences, and guess what they did? The model that they used to advance information was the same model that tribes used in Africa to advance the community forward. What am I saying? If there was a tribal dispute or a situation where they needed to advance the tribe or the clan forward, the elders would meet. They would talk about and address the issues of the community, and then they would advance them based on a common solution. This method of advancing us has always been embedded in the African since we were kidnapped, misplaced, enslaved, dehumanized, all of these things. People have been fighting to advance our intelligence and remembering who we are for quite some time. So writing helped. Having the exposure to be able to gain information that we couldn't at that time helped. Libraries helped. Researching in errors and connections, networking helped. But everybody couldn't make it to these conferences to advance the discussions and or challenge white academia on real issues because of the lack of funds. This has been the Achilles heel of the African in the America and diaspora for a long time. But it did not ever waive us from continuing to make headway through the problems and the issues that we faced. So, did they get everything right? No, they didn't. They didn't get everything right. But what they did get right was showing us the way, telling us what to do, leaving us with instructions, providing us with a methodology, presenting us an opportunity to pick up where they left off and advance forward, despite how we feel emotionally. So through the early 1900s into the great Renaissance eras that Brother Robborn likes to talk about, pumps his chest out with Danny about the Harlem Renaissance and things of that nature. The great minds, the Schomburg inspiring at the time a young John Henry Clark. To make a young John Henry Clark leave Georgia to come all the way to Harlem, New York, to continue his life and learning and researching and obtaining the wisdom to be able to instruct the next generation of great minds. So for those of us who love Dr. Clark so much, we ignore the fact that Schomburg inspired him. My son did a research, he did a project, Black History project a year ago. Well, he was in the 4th grade, he going to the 6th, 2 years ago, 4th grade, about Carter G. Woodson and Schomburg. And as a matter of fact, I actually have in my mom's garage right now, I have it, his presentation on Carter G. Woodson. And the other one, Schomburg, right here in front of me. And what actually inspired Dr. John Henry Clark? Well, it's called The Negro Digs Up His Past by Arthur Schomburg. I want to shout out Truth Historian for one, throwing me Schomburg, just throwing that out there. But also, if I needed help on anything like that, to what he wanted the kids to know, I ran it by him first, and he saw the presentation before the 4th grade class did, and when he thumbed it up, it was like, "You good? You ready to go?" Then my son took it into his classroom and he nailed it. He nailed it that much so that his teacher had him presented to a whole nother teacher's class. And he stood in front of two classes that day full of kids who knew nothing about Schomburg or Carter G. Woodson, by the way. Now, when we're advancing through all these eras, like I was saying, my bad, before I got sidetracked, we're advancing through all these eras. There's writing taking place, there's art taking place. There's, when I say art, I'm talking about music, I'm talking about poetry, I'm talking about dance, I'm talking about all these things that we've been doing for a long period of time. Culture. All of this was about restoring culture and historical perspective and giving us a sense of scientific foundation, economical achievements, and so forth, because we were behind. We would never be able to catch up to somebody that's 500 years ahead of us economically, unless we dismantled the whole thing and gave them an opportunity to be able to get ahead in the first place. But they continued publishing work. They would inspire a younger generation of authors and artists that would move the Pentium forward. And then we would go through a remembrance period. We would go through these remembrance periods of who we were and continuing to bring out our Africanness and transition some people, transitioning from our Africanness into the Negro, and then from the Negro into this Black power, and then into the Black power to this nigga. I might have skipped some, Sunil, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. By the way, go on MBK YouTube channel, subscribe to their channel, but also check out Sunil's presentation, which he did a beautiful job when he basically timelined you on who you are, from African to, you know, Negro, Black, and so forth. He goes through all of that. All right. And not the other work. The other work is great as well. They always do good work. Short, sweet, to the point too. They ain't long drawn out like I am, me and Kofi. But so we would go through these eras, and I call them the era of remembrances, because every time we have these moments, when I say the era of remembrances, it's like we've lost consciousness, and then we regain our consciousness, right? Because it means to be awake, to know, right? So we're still trying to know, to be woke, awake. That never stops. So we get this tool because of technology called social media. And you think about the what ifs. If Dr. John Henry Clarke had a YouTube page and, you know, a few times a week he would go live, what would his lectures be about, and what would he be having us read, and how would he formulate his classes? He probably would have 10, 15,000, 20,000 viewers, maybe. I don't know. I don't know. Probably not. You know, maybe 100, maybe 200. Maybe his channel wouldn't be as messy as other channels are. He only had 50 or 80 serious people watching. So we know off the top that he would be inspiring us to read books. We know off the top that he would inspire us to write. We know some of the subjects that he would be teaching seriously day in and day out. History is one. It's priority number one is restoring all of that. He's going to get into that. But I believe that there are other things to Dr. John Henry Clarke that we really didn't get to see real time, because we really only know him for his fight and his journey. But I think that he would fall right in line to what his teachers were teaching and what his teachers were teaching. And that would bring us forth. We know science would also be one of those conversations because he has wrote forwards in plenty of books that alluded to science. One, evolution, right? The white man's inheritance. So we know that people like Dr. Ben, we know what Dr. Ben was about because he was writing the heck out of some books. He was taking tours to chemistry. He was doing all of these things. So we know what that conversation would be like if Dr. Ben had social media. But what about us? What has this opportunity been like for us who put people like Dr. John Henry Clarke, John G. Jackson, Dr. Ben, the Schomburgs, Crummels, we put all of these people on these pedestals. But, well, I mean, what would it be like? I mean, if we really did what they were asking us to do with this tool that we have today called social media? Would we seriously be about the youth? Would we take this opportunity more serious by promoting our truth and educating one another and trying to get us out of this sleep state? This thing about consciousness and social media, the social media aspect of consciousness is a joke. Because the same people we've praised as our greatest elders and in the information age, we have let them down. We haven't did anything they have set forth for us to do. Now there is a small collective of individuals that write books, the right type of books, using a correct method, and presenting that information on a scholarly plane, that rather white academia, Chinese and otherwise, can grab these same books and review them. They can review them. We have a mass of people running around talking about, has your work been peer reviewed? If you consider that person to be your peer, buy his book, review it, and then give them your thoughts. That's what peer reviewers do. A collective group of people on a set subject all sit around at a round table and review the written work, each one giving their opinion based on where they are on that said subject with that information. Is it right? Is it accurate? Do you see incorrections? Are they misleading people? Is this scientifically correct? Does it follow the methodology? Does math and logic provide it proof? That's what they do. So when you try to outsmart and say, some people, I should say, has this work been peer reviewed? I want you to consider that. If you have to ask, has this been peer reviewed? How about you purchase the work and peer review it? Because that's what our ancestors would do. They wouldn't sit up and just talk about a set subject. They would peer review the work, and then they will get to work on the said subject and see if they can falsify, because that's what science teaches you to do. It teaches you to know, and it teaches you to do. So it would teach you to falsify that which this person has, or this group of people have written about. There is a collection of work in the conscious community today, written by people that seem to garner great honorage from our people, and their work is all kinds of falsifiable in their books. But yet, you'll purchase that book, you'll throw on your elite gaze, you'll promote your chakras, or you'll elevate your chakras, and you'll praise Buddha and make him African because of the book. All kinds of falsifiable. So this is why our research question is, are we, the conscious community, utilizing social media correctly? The real answer is not no. That would be a lie. The real answer is we have a very small collective that are actually standing on the shoulder of our ancestors and advancing the work forward, meaning they have took upon sound scholarship to promote and educate our people to advance and move them forward from where our ancestors have left off. Unfortunately, we are unable to move forward scientifically, economically, historically, and otherwise, because we continue to revert backwards to hash out corrections or misinformation or understandings with people who continue to drag us backwards. So we cannot use social media correctly, because if it is not to promote pseudoisms, ignorance, bad character, and behavior, then the masses will not appeal to that which is called or deemed scholarly. And in order for NBK to do groundbreaking research for the community and present it to us on social media and do published works, which Seneb is a writer. He writes. Did y'all know that? The people listening to my voice right now, whether you're in the live chat or otherwise, did you know that Seneb writes articles? He was at one point doing them once every 2 weeks or once a month or something like that. Did you know that? Have you read any of Seneb's work? Oh, I bet you didn't know that. What I'm saying is, that pretty much was my conclusion. But we are missing out on a great opportunity to do what our ancestors could not do, because they had limited resources and accessibility to the tools that we have today. Arguing on social media should not garner 10,000, 15,000, 18,000 views. At that point, it is purely entertainment. And I'm not saying that we should not be entertained, because culturally speaking, we have been manipulated into this aspect of being entertained over being educated. We find it more useful to be dumbed down than it is to be lifted up and educated. I do want to do something real quick. I'm gonna change The conversation real quick, just briefly, but I'm gonna try to stay a little bit on topic because I don't want to be all day and I've been on here a little bit. So I appreciate everybody that actually tuned in. So I don't know how many people is familiar with narcissistic personality disorder. They call it NPD. It is a personality disorder with a long-term pattern of abnormal behavior characterized by exaggerated feelings of self-importance, excessive need for admiration, and lack of empathy. Those affected often spend much time thinking about achieving power or success or on their appearance. They often take advantage of the people around them. The behavior typically begins by early adulthood and occurs across a variety of social situations. Why am I even mentioning this? Because we see this behavioral pattern take place on social media, which is one of the reasons why I'm arguing, are we using this opportunity correctly? Some of us are doing the best that we can to do so, but we have, within that, we have people that actually have this disorder. So it makes it very hard to advance information when we have people with disorders who refuse to be diagnosed and treated, stun our growth as a people. And then we have the science of ignorance. And I'm not going to get into all of this, but it says the first attempt to formalize the study of ignorance came recently with historian Robert Proctor of Stanford University, who coined the neologism agnotology to describe what he believed to be culturally produced ignorance. His purpose was to expose junk science used by tobacco companies. Proctor's best contribution may be the rhetorical, however. Science has lots of junk in the trunk, as do many other disciplines, where methods mask error, historic examples are legend. Goes on to say some other stuff. Phrenology, graphology, and astrology were all at one time considered sciences, as reasons or precedent is often used to promote falsehoods. Even Galileo capitulated when confronted with the received wisdom of the church. Luther and Calvin promoted predestination, the devil's influence, and anti-Semitism at the expense of reasoning, choice, and free will. Edison clung to direct current long after the advantages of Tesla's alternate current was known. William Rudolph Hearst promoted the errors of National Socialism under whatever that name is, Kristallnacht. And like a politician, Einstein was for nuclear weapons much longer than he was against them. Alas, Bob Proctor seems to be more concerned with the willful misuse of science or method rather than the study of vice and virtue of ignorance. That vacuum was filled in part recently by Stuart Feuerstein at Columbia University, who now attempts to explain the large scientific role of ignorance in a small book. The science of ignorance plagues us because it gives people an opportunity to play on our ignorance and take advantage of our ignorance through continuous contributions or so-called donations and things of that nature. And then they misinform us and keep us in an ignorant state because we don't know. We don't have a method to go back and fact check the information or vet the sources. These were things that our ancestors were doing at the time when they were arguing against racism, white supremacy, and scholarship. I don't want to talk about elder abuse. I do want to talk about physical abuse because mentally, I just think that we're physically abused, which is the intentional use of physical force that results in acute or chronic illnesses, bodily injury, physical pain, functional impairment, distress, or death. Physical abuse may include, but is not limited to, violent acts such as striking with or without an object or weapon, hitting, beating, scratching, biting, choking, suffocating, pushing, shoving, shaking, slapping, kicking, stomping, pinching, and burning. People are doing all of that to your intelligence or your ignorance. Physically abusing your ignorance. Emotional or psychological abuse, which is a verbal or nonverbal behavior that results in the infliction of anguish, mental pain, fear, or distress. Examples include behaviors intended to humiliate, calling names and insults, threaten, expressing an intent to initiate nursing home placement, isolate, seclusion from family or friends, or control, prohibiting or limiting access to transportation, telephone, money, or other sources. Neglect. Failure by a caregiver or other person responsible to protect an elder from harm. These are in reference to an elder, but forget the elder and put yourself in clothing, basic activities of a daily living, a shelter, which results in a serious risk of compromised health and safety. Examples include not providing adequate nutrition, hygiene, clothing, shelter, or access to necessary health care, or failure to prevent exposure to unsafe activities and environments. Social media is toxic. It is playing on your ignorance. It is allowing you not to develop your consciousness. It is not doing its job for the masses. We are a struggling people in a toxic environment that are unable to seriously use this tool to promote our truth and move our people forward and challenge academia on all aspects to solve problems. At the end of the day, we're supposed to be solving problems for the next generation. We have to restore and control the narrative that was pushed by our forefathers who evolved what we call consciousness into what we know of it today. So all the metaphysical, pseudoscience, we've been here, all this other stuff, we need to have a stern approach to that ignorance collectively. We can't continue to make the mistakes of the past and the present by keeping us in a state of ignorance and misinformation because we have the option to log into a social media account and say the dumbest thing ever and get 15,000 likes. That is not promoting our truth. That is not standing on scholarship, and that is not inspiring our ancestors at all. If we are to be true to this information, we are to continue to have it evolve. We are to push the narrative further than the people before us. We are to continue to publish books, correct misinformation from our past elders, and stand on the good information and move it forward. We need to remove the emotionalism out of it and the personality worship and do what keeps us on a scientific plane to compete on a world stage. We should not run from science, history, economics. We should embrace all three aspects. We should be anthropologists. We should promote doctoring. We shouldn't be talking about what's the stupid conversation? Some people want to argue about, shots. Dumbest thing possible. When you had African Americans that were doing groundbreaking research to bring forth immunization. Dumbest thing. You had Black African doctors on the forefront promoting us getting shots. And now today we talking about, oh, we don't need no shots. You just need to eat the right fruit, exercise a little bit, drink some water, you good. Alkaline water at that. It's gonna cure all your diseases. If you extract or catch a disease or anything like that, nah, don't worry. Just eat healthy. Remove the sugars, remove all that stuff. Certain flours, all this. Alkaline, all 100. You good. You didn't see our ancestors arguing that stuff. This is some new age pseudoscience stuff that's being argued. Where's this published work at? Oh, because the white man said, uh, uh, the Kennedys, because they against immunization. We should be too, right? Wrong. We are arguing some of the dumbest things in the field of studies that doesn't even require it to even come up anymore. And when it comes up, there is a steadfast effort to rid itself of that stupid information immediately by using science, falsifying it off the rip. Oh, that's wrong. That's a lie. Boom, next. We have to hold ourselves accountable for character in our studies, in our work, in our conversations, in our ability to know and to become consciousness or conscious, I'm sorry. So I only ask that everyone that has listened in today that even cares, you may not even care. And I think it's a lot of people who don't care at all. They just need this opportunity to exist to somebody in real life because they don't have any friends outside of life, and they use this opportunity to argue out their frustrations on whatever topic that comes to their mind. But for people that are really serious about this tool that we call social media, please use it correctly. Please inspire to use it correctly so that we can advance our people. Because if we don't, we're going to continue to be stuck on stupid. And then my kids are going to be arguing the same points that have already been argued by other people. And they will not be able to advance and evolve. Every other culture is evolving except for the African in the Americas, and the diaspora. We are behind on every level that we can talk about. And we can't advance if we continue to have circular arguments about things that people don't want to do the work on, or assume that they know it because, or they know and they don't know it, and then are afraid to do the real work and advance the discussion by using all the tools you've had, researching, reading, gathering all this data to only say, okay, I'm gonna believe in it because of the 6 sources agree. What about the 6 sources that don't agree? What about vetting the 6 that agree and vetting the 6 that don't agree, and then drawing an honest conclusion at the end of all that research? But who am I? I'm nobody. But that's all I got for you guys today. Kofi's on the panel. I'm gonna be quiet. Maybe Kofi has something that he want to say. So, Kofi, if you free to speak, bro, the floor is yours.
Oh man, I just popped in, man. I didn't even know you was live. I don't even know what the discussion was about.
The discussion is about, are we, the conscious community, and I'm putting parentheses, we, utilizing social media correctly?
I'm finna cuss. Oh shit. Oh, and I did. No, I mean, I know you probably done wrapped it up. I mean, they done heard me. They done heard my spiel too many times on this conscious community, social media uh community, man. There's too much. I don't even want to speak no more about it, man. I mean, I know how at times those of us who are trying to do, trying to do the work, and trying to do the right thing and trying to be genuine, we get frustrated at these clowns coming in and, having these same pseudo discussions and um, really not putting in the work. Um, so I mean, I understand your frustration. That's why I bag away from the Facebook. That's why I call it the social media community too, because I mean that's all it is. I mean, I bag away from Facebook and from YouTube, so I won't be frustrated anymore looking at some of these people who are actually using the people to uh what I'm saying, to make a living. They don't care nothing about people. They don't care nothing about us. They don't care nothing about giving accurate and correct information. They care about entertaining, getting them views so they can get that money up. Well, I mean, that's all I got though, man. Like I said, people know my thing, and if and then go check out my little article too on this so-called conscious community, man. But that's it. That's all I got, man.
All right, guys. We ain't gonna keep y'all today, man. It is the fourth. Whether you support, whether you support the Fourth of July or not, you did have African ancestors who sacrificed themselves for our independence and fought in wars and were a part of groundbreaking opportunities to advance and build this nation with their blood, sweat, and tears as well. So I respect those who are celebrating the festivities on behalf of their grandparents and great grandparents who sacrificed their lives for the independence of this stupid place. And I respect those who choose to not celebrate because they know what we were doing in the fields when so-called independence was so-called being reached, met, and had or made. So I don't want to take away um, from anybody else's time. I just would hope that we would not only just say that we know people were still picking cotton on July 4th and whatever year that, but we did have people that was orchestrating and fighting and carrying on to advance to fight for their independence and freedom as well. So we just can't say this is what we were doing when we know that we also had a mass of ancestors that were out there sacrificing themselves for our greater good. So I really appreciate everybody, man, who took the time out to even be a part of the discussion and kind of walk through with me this particular thing without me even having to really put a presentation together. We kind of like, did it. Now we could have did this a little bit better if I would have just put some stuff out there to present. But I really, I thank you guys. If you come up with a different conclusion that I come up with, I respect that. And hopefully, the next generation of great minds, writers and thinkers, doers, not sayers, will be promoted and will be inspired and promote themselves and on the same level of our greatest minds that have sacrificed so much for us to be having these type of discussions today to try to encourage and promote our truths, our consciousness, our state of being awakened and knowing, and utilize their opportunities with social media a lot better than we have over the past since we've had access to it. We have really abused it. Oh man, to belittling ourselves even more, bringing out the niggerisms to a whole nother degree. But thank you again for tuning in. Man, y'all enjoy the rest of y'all day. I look forward to seeing you guys on Sunday when we will get into a presentation that I'm actually excited to get into. I summarize it. I don't I don't sugarcoat anything. I want to promote the goods, the bads, and the ugly. But I will be talking about the rise and fall of the talented 10th. And we're going to get into it, man. And I thank the ancestors for their sacrifices and all they have done for us to even, be here today. So shout out to y'all, man. And you know, uh, go have some fun, man. Enjoy your family, man. It's all you get. One life, one family. Peace.